Hello everyone. In today's video, I'm going to talk about interviews. Interviews are usually attended by applicants or job applicants who have been shortlisted by prospective employers for the position that they applied for. We will be talking about different types of interviews, and briefly, there are quite a few that are listed in this textbook. If you turn to page 77 of the textbook, you will find that there's a list of the different types of interviews. The first one is a face-to-face interview. And then we also have the screening, telephone interview, video conference interview, as well as what we call group or panel interview. So let's begin by looking at the first one, which is the face-to-face interview. So as you can see in this picture, face-to-face interview entails the employee or the prospective employee and the interviewer to meet up face-to-face in a location that is determined by the employer. Typically, this will be at the office where the applicant will be working in if he or she gets selected or gets appointed. So face-to-face encounter is the most convenient type to arrange and manage. This is mainly because for an employer or for an interviewer, all they need to do is to pick up the phone and give you a call or email you the date and time of the interview. So as the interviewee, what you need to do would be just to attend the interview at the allotted time and at the place determined by your employer. So the benefits of this kind of interview is that for the employer will be able to see you or to have the first impression of you in real life rather than via telephone or via video conferencing. And for an employee or prospective employee, the advantage of this is that you'll be able to look at the surrounding as you'll be typically called to the venue or the office that you are likely to work in if you are appointed or if you're selected. So face-to-face interview in general is most typical in all workplaces. Next, we are going to look at screening interview. So for screening interview, it usually involves two levels of interview. And this is usually done because there are large numbers of applicants. And sometimes screening interview will be followed up by what we call a subsequent interview. In cases where there are a large number of applicants, let's say if we have 50 applicants, it will be hard for the interviewer to conduct one-on-one face-to-face interview because it takes a lot of time, and that would easily take up 4 or 5 days if you have 50 interviewees. So because of that, sometimes they have to conduct what we call a screening interview. So screening interview is mainly to screen out candidates who are perhaps not that suitable or who are perhaps not ready for the job position that they are trying to fill. So because of that, the screening will actually take away, or should I say reduce, the number of applicants and leave just a small pool of interviewees for the subsequent interview. So that would mean, let's say if there are 50 interviewees, after the screening maybe 10 will be selected for the next round of interview. And during the next round of interview, with only 10 applicants, it will be easier for them to conduct, let's say, face-to-face, in-depth interview. Usually, screening interviews are handled by the HR department, and subsequent interviews are usually handled by the people or the department where you apply to join. For example, if you've applied to join the company as a graphic designer, most likely the manager of the graphic department will be interviewing you for the subsequent interview. Another type of interview that we will look at is what we call the telephone interview. So telephone interview is also sometimes used for screening. So if they also have a big number of applicants, so they sometimes will call you up rather than ask you to come and attend a face-to-face interview. So in this way, they'll be able to reduce the numbers of people that they would actually meet for more in-depth discussion or more in-depth interview regarding each of the posts that are on offer. So there are of course advantages to this telephone interview, and as you can imagine, one of the main advantage of the telephone interview is that you can prevent waste of time and money. And this is for both sides, meaning as an employer, I don't have to arrange for so many sessions of in-depth interview because I can actually screen you out and then just select a smaller group of applicants. As for the interviewee, you will save time because one, you won't have to attend the interview at the location or you don't have to travel to the venue. And at the same time, the need for traveling expenses won't be there anymore because you'll be doing this on just the phone. And usually this will involve very minimal expenses, just the phone call. Another type of interview that's very similar to telephone interview, which is made possible because of technological advancement, is what we call the video conference interview. And similar to the telephone interview, video conference interview also has the advantages of saving your time and saving your traveling expenses. The only benefit compared to telephone interview is that you'll be able to see the person in front of your screen rather than just listening to the applicant. So this is the next best thing to, I would say, face-to-face interview because of localities or sometimes because of where the interviewees are based in relation to where the headquarters or where the office are. So it would be hard for sometimes interviewees to attend interview, especially if it involves longer distances, it involves flights, because this might also involve other things like transportation, hotel stay if it's really far. So if let's say we in UMS wants to interview someone, for example, an international applicant who wants to be a lecturer in UMS, so it's likely that we can do video conferencing because it will save the interviewee time and money. So this will also give us a chance to see him acting or behaving right in front of us without having to ask him to travel. And this has actually been done for UMS, so this is quite typically done for big companies or organizations that actually employ international employees as expats. The next type of interview that we're going to look at is what we call the panel interview. So the first few types of interviews that we've talked about are mainly interviews between one-to-one. So on this page, you will see what we call panel interview for the reason that you will have more than two interviewers. So on this page, you will see that we have 3 interviewers and 1 interviewee. So this is what we call a panel because you have a panel of interviewers interviewing you at the same time. So the advantages of having panel interview is that you can help reduce the biasness, and it can help the employers to increase their chances of getting the most suitable candidate. So why is this so? First of all, in a panel, it is usually consisting of, let's say, the gentleman here. He would usually represent the HR department. And then we would also have the other ladies that you can see here which could represent the department that the applicant is applying to join. So for example, if this gentleman is the HR manager, this lady here could be from the graphic department. So she could be from, let's say she could be the manager of the graphic department, and this other lady could be the manager of the advertising or the marketing department, because these two departments, they work very closely with one another. So that is why this would also increase their chances of getting the best candidate, for the reason that they will be able to ask the interviewees questions from different perspectives. And therefore, the HR person or the HR officer will be able to find out whether you're suitable, and the graphic department will be able to find out whether you have the skills to perform the task required of you in that company. And finally, we have what we call the group interview. So this group interview is sort of the opposite of the panel interview. So instead of having a panel of interviewers and just one interviewee, this group interview consists of many interviewees, but sometimes one, or it could also be a panel interviewer. But the difference is that there will be a bigger number of interviewees. So one of the main reasons you are asked to attend a group interview is because, one, of course, they want to save time. In one session, they could interview 4 or 5 candidates. And another reason is because they want to pit you against other applicants. So pitting you against other applicants means that they will be able to put you side by side with the other applicants, and this allows them to actually compare candidate 1, candidate 2, 3, and 4, and so on and so forth. So usually these are candidates applying for the same position. But when you are pitted against one another, it's quite easy to see or to compare between qualities, maybe in some cases physical appearance, and of course, most importantly, your suitability for the position. So if you look at this photo here, you will see that there are 4 interviewees. So interviewee A says, I'm prepared for anything. And then interviewee B says, I'm so organized, I'm taking notes. And then we have interviewee C who say, my suit is by far the smartest of all. And of course, we could also have someone that says, why am I even here? So by putting you next to one another, the interviewer would be able to compare you and say, okay, this seems to be a more suitable candidate because he's knowledgeable. And this candidate is able to present herself well, and she can speak English fluently, which is what we need for the job, for example. So these are why sometimes you are asked to attend group interviews. So for the next part of the video, I will be talking about the different types of questions in an interview. So let's go to the next page of your text, if I'm not mistaken. Yep. So on page 81 of your text, in order to prepare yourself for a job interview, it is very important for you to come up with a list of anticipated questions, as highlighted here. Anticipated questions means questions that you think might appear or might be asked during the interview session. Of course, the benefits of having a list of anticipated questions is that, one, it can prepare you for questions that are most likely going to be asked, and two, having these anticipated questions allow you to prepare first your answers to these questions. So these benefits are actually good for you in terms of preparing yourself for the interview session. So briefly, interview questions can be divided into a few different types. They include questions like, direct questions, non-direct questions, problem-based or situational questions, as well as behavioral questions. So let's talk about the most common one, which is tell us about yourself. So as you can see from here, tell us about yourself. This is basically a question whereby you will be asked so that the employer will be able to get to know you better. Usually tell us about tell us about you questions are questions that are used to warm you up. So typically the interviewers will not start with asking you very difficult questions, and they will not go straight to the point. What they will do is they will allow you to warm up a bit, or they'll talk to you, ask you about your name, how was your day, did you manage to get your way here easily to the office, I mean easily. So usually these are the questions they will ask you to warm you up, and that is mainly to help you to feel less nervous. So these are typically what we call a warm-up question. So for warm-up questions, you usually are expected to briefly introduce about yourself, maybe why you have decided to apply for a job. Based on my experience, when candidates answer this question, they do have the tendency of repeating their CV or their application letter. So that could be one of the downfall I could foresee. For example, when asked, okay, tell us about yourself. Let's say I'm the interviewer and I ask you that question. Some candidates tended to read from their application letter or their CV. So they will just regurgitate, or they will just repeat what they have written or submitted. So the recommendation is for you to not repeat this information, for the reason that your interviewer would have read all this information. That is why they call you up and ask you to come in for an interview. So if possible, try as much as you can not to repeat your resume or your application letter or the information there, but instead talk about something else that is relevant to you, or perhaps that will share more about your personality or you as a person. So for example, you can talk about things like, why were you interested, or what prompted you to get involved in this arena? For example, why have you decided to go into graphic design? Was there a background history to it? Or it's just because it's a course that you've taken and during the course you found something especially attracted in your opinion, and that's why you wanted to go into graphic designing. So share things that you didn't share in your CV or your application. So that would make your sharing more interesting rather than just reading out what you have submitted to them and what they already know. The next type of question is what we call the direct question. For direct questions, these are typically questions that are quite straightforward, and because of that, they want you to provide direct answers, which means straightforward answers. So for example, as you can see given here, if hired, what can you offer to the company? So if that's the question, your answer would be directly what you can do. So this will involve the job descriptions that we have discussed, I think 2 weeks ago. So for example, what can you do? Can you troubleshoot problems? Can you handle customers' complaint? Can you lead a group of people or lead a team? So this is where you have to give them as answers that are as straightforward as possible, because they want to know what you can do, and therefore you tell them in what way you can serve that company. So on the other hand, we also have what we call the indirect questions. So for indirect questions, usually you are asked this question because the interviewer wants to get more information about you. So this is not that straightforward, and usually these questions are asked because mainly highlighted here. They want to know what kind of person you are and how well you are suited for the position. So this kind of questions are usually questions that could be not related to the position you're applying for or the business you are venturing into. So, for example, tell us how you spend your time wisely. So, these questions are very general, but from your answers, they'll be able to know maybe your hobbies, your personalities, or whether you are able to manage your time. However, with questions like this, you have to be careful with the wordings that are used. So, for example, tell us how you spend your time wisely. So, the keyword here is actually the word wisely. So, it would be good for you to share activities that you do that shows you are using your time in a very good way or in a good manner. So perhaps it would not be a good idea if you share things like, okay, in my spare time, I like to watch television or go shopping or do some online shopping, because that may not relate directly to being able to use your time wisely, right? So perhaps you could talk about reading, or perhaps you could talk about how you like to use a certain time for gardening and how you like to use certain time to make sure that your house or your household chores are actually being organized well. So these are some of the ways for you to highlight or to answer this type of questions by highlighting certain skills or certain knowledge or certain abilities you think that would make you valuable for the employers. So another type of question which students or young graduates typically find a bit, I would say, challenging would be what we call the problem-based or situational questions. So problem-based questions or situational questions, they usually begin with the word if. So if types of questions are usually hypothetical questions. So meaning they'll come up with a situation or a context for you. And why they do this is because they want to see how you can troubleshoot or how good you are at solving certain problems as highlighted here. So mainly from your answers, they will be able to know whether you can or cannot handle a particular issues. So for example, if a customer complains that you are being rude to her and that she would not want to go to your shop anymore, what would you say or do to change her mind? So in questions like this, the employer or the interviewer would like to see how you will handle situations such as this if you are the one who is, for example, in this case, in a shop. So possibly you are one of the shop assistant, or they call it sales associates, right? So if you are in that person's shoe, what will you do? And most importantly, what would you say to change her mind? So in this context, you will look at how you are going to solve it, and from your answer, they'll be able to know what are the things you are willing to do in order to make the customer perhaps happier and will still want to go to your shop. So this is a problem that you need to solve. Similar to problem-based or situational questions, we also have a type that is called behavioral questions. So behavioral questions are actually questions that are asked in order to find out how you might behave or act in future. So based on what happened now, they will try to predict if the same situation happens in future, whether you'll be doing the same thing or similar things. So for example, tell us about a problem that you faced in your previous company. So this one is based on your previous experience. And how have you solved the problem? So what have you done previously? So they can see from your reaction how you solve certain issues, and based on that they will be able to predict if you have similar situation, how you'll be able to react to that situation. So mainly this is used to gauge your personality, your sensibility, whether you're making sensible decisions, sensible choices, and adaptability. How do you adapt to the situation when you see or when you're faced with a problem? So definitely they'll be able to judge your ability to navigate or to handle difficult questions and situations. So these are the different types of behavioral questions. And for your interview assessments, you will actually be asked different types of interview questions. So it could include problem-solving question, it could include behavioral question, it could include just some warm-up questions like tell us about yourself or tell me about yourself. But the questions you'll be getting would involve different types. So each and every one of you, as mentioned in class, you will be interviewed based on the position you have applied for. So if you've applied to be a customer service officer, the questions given to you will be related to that position. And if a problem-solving question is posed to you, that problem-solving question will be related to customer service because that's the position that you're applying for. So as you can see, each and every one of you, because you have different projects, and some of you here, you have created different companies. Due to these reasons, you will also be asked different questions because the setting or the situation or the context is different. In addition to that, you are all taking up different positions within that project. And because of that, please expect different questions for everyone. So that is all for this video.